Hello, folks. Welcome to the Vandal Factory podcast, where we feature interviews and music and poems, and often we need to do a bit of editing to make everything fit. So this is a factory floor cut special, a bit of a bonus piece of content for you lovely raptors. In April 2025, we released episode 32, The Freelance Feelings Factory, a special episode dedicated to self-employed legends across the arts and cultural sector. And we got to chat to some amazing folks, but to squeeze it all in, we did need to do a spot of trimming. That's where this episode comes in. This is the full interview with Annabel Turpin, who is the Chief Executive at Storyhouse in Chester. Annabel spoke to us about policies and procedures, making life easier for freelancers and calling out other organisations who don't support self-employed people as well as they should. If you enjoyed this chat, please listen to the full episode 32 with loads of different voices from across the sector. We also recommend episode 31, where we spoke to Sarah Brigham, who is the artistic director of Derby Theatre, who also talks about making buildings inclusive and accessible to communities. If you enjoy what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star review, and all the music we play on the podcast is available on Spotify if you search for Vandal Factory Playlist. Here's Annabel.
Right then, hello, we've got Annabel, extraordinarily experienced person. You were the chief exec, you are the chief exec of the Storyhouse in Chester, an amazing arts building, which I've been to and I love. And you were for many, many years the artistic director and chief exec at ARC in the Northeast. You were also the founder and co-director of Future Arts Centres, which is a network of over 150 arts centres, and it will be supporting them on their artistic and social contribution to the work that they do. You are extraordinarily experienced, and we are so grateful to have you here on the Vandal Factory podcast. We feel like we should be probably using this time for personal development, getting professional advice, but we're not here. We are here to ask you. You're part of the Freelance Feelings Special podcast, and there was a particular reason why you were the first name that popped into our heads when we were thinking of who can we talk to for an episode that champions the freelancers in the arts, and that's because you've been delivering a particular service for freelancers on Twitter, well, now known as X. Can you tell us a little bit about what that service was and why we might have invited you on this episode?
Of course, yeah, and it's fantastic to be here and to be talking to you and your audiences. I'm a real believer in kind of action and behaviour, and I kind of think we can say lots of things about how much we value freelancers, but I've always tried to kind of go, but what can I actually do about it? And one of the things that I am so passionate about is paying freelancers on time. I just think it is something so easy for people to do, because most of the time when freelancers don't get paid, it's just a process thing. It's not because the venue hasn't got the money or the organisation hasn't got the money. There are exceptions, of course. Genuinely, it's just a kind of process thing. And it just feels like if we could fix that one thing, we could make a lot of freelancers a bit happier. So I've always kind of championed this, and I've always really tried to, encourage other organisations to kind of pay on time and pay quickly. But what I've realised is it's really hard for freelancers to call organisations out. And I completely understand that cycle of, I hate this organisation because they never pay me on time, but I'm also really dependent on them for the work that is going to pay my bills when they eventually pay me. And I think that power dynamic is something that we have to kind of really be aware of. So what I offered to do was to name and shame, essentially, organisations that weren't paying artists on time, particularly venues, because it's venues that I have kind of in my network. And I kind of thought, peer to peer, I should be able to do that because I don't live with that same reliance on, my next paycheck coming from that organisation. I do rely on them as, partners. So there's an element of risk there, but not nearly as much. So I simply said, if people want to DM me with organisations that have been really slow to pay, I'm not a debt collector. I can't chase them on your behalf. That's not what I'm offering to do. What I'm offering to do is in an anonymous way, in a timely way. So not necessarily the minute that you DM me, because that might be a bit of a giveaway and might expose you. But on a regular basis, I'll list any organisations that haven't been paying freelancers on time. And, I've had a mixed response to that from organisations. Some have responded really positively and really apologetically. Some have been a bit more defensive. But I can absolutely guarantee all of them have gone and checked whether they owe any freelancers any money. So that's just been my little way of trying to, help freelancers a bit.
It's wonderful. It's so brilliant. Thank you so much. Like we've both, I'm a full-time freelancer at the moment, and Henry was for 12 years
12
or something
years.
like that. So we really know exactly what it is that you're talking about. And it's as you say, it's just something that should be so easy to get right. And I think I often talk about the frustration that the assumption is that it's fine, like that it can feel to you really desperate and be giving you as a freelancer sleepless nights, and yet you get the impression that, and it's maybe not true, but there's people sitting on salaries who really have no idea about if they got round to that job today, or if they didn't follow up that email, that it's just another thing on their list that they have to do. And is that kind of, I'm just talking about the feeling of like fear on one side and a sense of comfort on another side. And of course, there are people in the middle who are really stressed out and are trying to make it work and who do understand. But that's exactly what you're working on. You're calling out and saying, we can do better. Do better. Sort it out, please.
One of the other things we did when I was working at ARC in Stockton was just building that understanding across the entire staff team of what it means to work freelance, and also who these people were. So, if you work in a finance department, you're just processing invoices. 1 minute you're paying BT and Southern Electric, the next minute you're paying Henry Raby. You're just paying another invoice. Nice. And then if only those amounts got mixed up, hey. But I think it's trying to personalize it. And we had a fantastic finance team at ARC, as we do here at Storyhouse. And them meeting the artist, them really understanding like what it is to work freelance, knowing what they're working on, being part of that kind of organizational culture about supporting freelancers, that's also important. So that when they see that invoice, they go, oh yeah, that's a freelancer. We need to make sure they're priority paid. Actually, BT, you can wait your 30 days or your 60 days, and it's understanding what's behind that invoice, I think, is really key for organizations to get right.
Is there anything, Annabel, that you'd recommend in, if there is someone with power, with a hierarchy listening, of going, even a simple thing of changing your processes or your way invoices or contracts are made that actually really does help freelancers? You say creating a culture of understanding freelance life.
Yeah, I think as with most things, it comes down to clarity of communication. So, being clear with freelancers what your payment runs are. So, we used to do a payment run every 2 weeks. We told freelancers that we employed, that was the payment run. We told them if your invoice is with us by Wednesday, it will get paid on the Friday. That clarity of communication, to the point where if we had a very small finance team, if they're on annual leave, we'd email regular freelancers and say, there's not going to be a payment run next week. So if you want to get your invoices in early, we can pay them this week. Otherwise, it'll be the week after. You have to plan just like we do. So I think it just comes down. And if you can't pay for any reason, like stuff happens, people are off sick, we're all working often on small teams. So one person being off can make a fundamental difference. Communicate, tell people, don't just leave it for the freelancer to chase you. Be proactive. Sorry, we couldn't pay you on Friday. You know, whoever it was off sick. We're going to do the run on Tuesday. It just comes down to communication. I mean, there's system things. Everyone has different finance systems, and often people think that doing payment runs more often is more work. I don't buy into that.
Yeah.
You can spread out those payment runs and make them much more effective and save yourself and freelancers a lot of heartache if you do them more often. So I would always advocate for frequent pay runs. But ultimately, it's just about communicating.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And it's again, I'm gonna start like repeating myself because it's so frustrating, um, and and so relevant in different ways. Like I have about 8 different sort of quote unquote employers at the moment in January. And before the last year, I could give you examples of all of them, not all of them, but so many of them um, having being in exact not doing exactly what you're talking about. So leaving it up to me, which feels really embarrassing. It does it
Yeah.
and it feels it's a ridiculous thing. It shouldn't be embarrassing, but it fills you with shame actually to say, hi, can you just let me know where this payment is and when it will be paid? And it feels like, is it too much to ask that I get before I've started work? I get a breakdown of what my roles are, where what times and hours I'm expected to work, where the location is of what that is, how to invoice, because often it's also
Yeah.
you're not told what the systems are, and if you're working across universities, art centres, community settings, they've all got different systems. So a breakdown of email this person with these details. If you need me to have an invoice number, then please let me know before I start working. Like, is that too much to ask? And then when the payment will be in, it just
Yeah. It genuinely pains me to hear you say that. I never, ever, ever feel ashamed about asking those questions. That sense of shame is ridiculous. We should, it's organizations that should feel ashamed if they're not providing that information. Yeah, it just seems so basic to me.
it really does. Oh, I'm finding this conversation very validating.
Anna, Annabelle, I wonder if I could ask, where does this like come from for you? Is it that you spent years as a freelancer, or is it just that like you could see this was happening in organizations and you knew the change had to be made? Where does these values come from for you?
It's a good question. I've never worked freelance entirely. I've done freelance work alongside a paid job, so I've certainly never been in the position of being reliant on it. I think it probably comes from working very closely with artists and really listening to what people were saying. So I did quite a lot of work as a producer, kind of within my organizational role, but sort of starting to really understand the relationships that artists have with organizations, particularly venues. Definitely, I think a growing understanding of what I would call that power imbalance, which just feels incredibly uncomfortable when, the creative power is sitting with the freelancers to a great extent. I mean, I grew up in a family, my dad was self-employed. I think that does instill a sense of a sort of particular work ethic and a kind of understanding of that relationship with someone that you're in a contract with rather than someone that you're salaried with, and the ebb and flow of work, I suppose,
Yeah.
and the kind of fragility of that. But yeah, I guess it's probably come from lots of artists who very generously talk to me about their experiences, and thinking we should be able to do better. And I have a responsibility, I'm in a leadership position. I can't shirk that responsibility. Yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question there,
No,
but
Yeah, you absolutely have. And yeah, I think it often comes back to how you're brought up so often. And I was just thinking about, you've got this wealth of experience over decades. I mean, you were working in the arts the last time there was a Labour government. Imagine that. I don't know if I've got my dates right there. You're the dates guy. But anyway, so have you seen a change in freelance culture and the way that the arts uses and works with freelancers over those decades?
Mhm. Yes, definitely. I think there's a greater awareness. I mean, even just the word freelancer and all of the work that's been done around the kind of freelancers networks and reports, and obviously the Arts Council England have just appointed someone who's got a specific remit around individuals and freelancers. So there's
We're
definitely
going to interview her on the podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
amazing. That's
Yasmin
great
Khan. Yeah,
news.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
stay tuned, folks.
I'll tune into that one, definitely. I think so. I think there's a growing awareness. I think we're still working each other out to a certain extent. I'd like to say we'd got there, but I don't think we have. I wouldn't be having to name and shame late payers if we had. So I think there's still work to do, but I think there is a growing awareness. I also think we need to be better at equipping people entering the industry with what it's like to be a freelancer. And a lot of the work I've done with graduates and artists very early in their career, they don't need to know how to be creative. They don't need to know how to make work. They definitely need to know how to fill in a tax return, which is the thing
Oh,
that,
yeah.
So how in this day and age, when we've been running creative education courses for so long, we are still turning people out of college and university ill-equipped to navigate the challenges of being freelance. You are running your own business.
Mm-hmm.
If you're freelance, you're running your own business. You might call it a micro business, but where is that coming from? Where is that kind of teaching around your value? That's a massive thing, how much do I charge? How do I value my time? How do I account for my sick leave, my holiday, my learning and development budgets? How are all those things? I just feel like there's still a way to go
Oh
in
my
terms of getting
goodness.
that
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, that's so important.
I remember a student when I was living in York had just graduated, and they were like working it out, and they just dropped me a message on Facebook back in the day, and were like, between like a limited company and a CIC, and I just like literally had one quick phone call with them, and that person like pops up every so often on social media down in London doing amazing producing stuff, and probably teaching people how to do all this. And it's sort of word of mouth, and which is great, and we look after each other. But it sort of shouldn't be about like the amount of times we've posted in UK producers going, "What's this?" And I know there's no like toolkit, but like there has it does feel like we fumble in the dark a lot in the sector when we're just working it out, and no one's like hoarding the secrets, but it is a little bit like, if you know, which is a privilege, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to find ways of sharing that knowledge in a more efficient, effective, economically viable way. Like you can't, you are freelance, you can't just give that knowledge away all the time. I know you're incredibly generous people and support loads of other artists, and those kind of forums like the UK Producers Forum you mentioned on Facebook, like they are great, and there's such a generosity of spirit there. But there are institutions that are funded to educate creative people and give them degrees and qualifications and awards. There's organisations that are funded, or if they're not subsidised, nevertheless have a remit to support artists and creatives. So there has to be ways of hardwiring this stuff in. And it feels like we're still quite a long way away from doing that.
I think something you've said that strikes me, and I think even at 34, I'm still having to learn that the idea that you are running your own business, you are your own business, It's really taken me a long time. I think even in the last few years, I think I started doing a PhD a few years ago, and that meant I'm not paying to do the PhD, but I'm also not getting paid to do it. And it was at that point where I went, okay, a lot of my time and energy is going to be taken up studying. So I need to really make sure that the time I'm working is paid for, and it needs to be, if you're paying for my skills, you're going to pay me properly, particularly if you're in community activist artistic spaces where essentially you're always going to be asked to do stuff in kind, you're always going to want to as well. And there's a kind of sense that your skills are not worthy of pay, that this is a hobby still. Still get that feeling that like this is something people do when they're retired, they do it in their spare time, and that's a real culture that I feel like when you're a freelancer you're fighting against. And again, it can feel mean. It feels like it's my fault to have to advocate for getting paid, or saying, no, I can't do that, sorry, unless you get funding, in which case I'd be more than happy to do this. And that's I was reflecting on with younger people particularly, and they're so desperate to get experience and they're keen, and often there's a disparity with kind of who's got mum and dad who can fund them to do stuff for free and do kind of free internships, and who hasn't got that, and that's having a huge impact on who works in the arts.
Definitely. And as I say, I think there's a long way to go. But I think back 10, 20 years, I'm that old. And I think about all of the free internships. Internships were a massive thing. They were never paid. There was rarely expenses. And of course, it meant only a certain group of people, to the detriment of the sector. Obviously, to the detriment of the individuals that couldn't take part, but ultimately to the detriment of the sector not to have that talent and creativity coming in. I don't think you see that as much anymore, and I'm not saying that there aren't still more opportunities for people that have that kind of privilege, but I think organisations would get called out if they were putting out those kind of opportunities. And the shift towards paying artists for time in addition to just when you're performing or rehearsing. So certainly
time.
A better
the time
understanding.
when you can't get other work, even though you might only be working for 2 hours that day, it means you can't do other work, etc.
The Venues North network, which was a network that I established 13 years ago, I think. For years, we'd invite artists to come and present to a group of programmers, and it was unpaid. The whole thing's unfunded. It was just a kind of unpaid opportunity. And it got to the point where we felt uncomfortable asking artists to give up their time, even though we hoped that they would walk away with support and tour dates and all of those things. And we changed the model to being a membership model where venues paid a small amount every year to enable us to pay artists not just travel expenses, but a contribution towards their time. So I think I just say that as a kind of example of how there has been some change. There has been that kind of growing awareness and valuing that actually I'm being paid to sit in this room and you're not. So how can we try and level that up? There's still a long way to go, but hopefully some positive steps.
Well, we'll just wrap up before we ask our final question, unless Nat's got anything else. I wondered, on a positive note, is there a particular project or a show that really did rely on freelancers? It wasn't so in-house, but actually you were like, this is the power of freelancers, where people are coming from different backgrounds, experiences, and you're just proud about, you'd like to say, this couldn't have happened without the amazing freelance staff that we brought on board.
Oh, it's so hard to pick out just one. I mean, I don't think any creative project I've ever been involved in would have been the project it was without the kind of creative freelance workforce. It underpins everything we do. And, I've been in Chester just over a year now, and we've already formed a new network for freelancers to try and build that freelance community with partners across the. Actually, we're really exciting. It's a cross-border network, so we're working with a partner in Wales, Data Clwyd, as well as other partners in Cheshire. So yeah, I find it hard to, and I've done that because I've got here and gone, where's the network? Where's the freelance community? I want to see them as a whole, not just kind of see them as individuals. So I'm not sure I can pick out one. It's underpinned everything I've done.
Yeah, what a
Well,
great
thank
note.
you so much for your service for freelancers, as well as the wider national. Thank you so much for your time and joining us on the Vandal Factory show.
Thanks for having me.
Is there a song that you would like our lovely listeners to take away with them?
I would pick David Bowie's Heroes because it is such an uplifting song, and I feel like it's really appropriate for what we're talking about.
Can swing, though nothing will keep us together. We can beat them forever.